All right, hello YouTube. Welcome to Dark Tower Palaver. This is the first book club of 2024, and in terms of live streams especially, because I know podcasts, a lot of times people listen to them more on demand, but in terms of live streams, this is our first live stream of 2024 that is actually on time. I had to delay the first episode into last week because I was sick, so this is the first time that we're back on track. This is technically the real week that I was set to record. It was supposed to be like the 13th, I think, something like that, is when I was sick. But I had to bump that one to the 20th. So this one is actually the first one that is fully on track live stream wise. So excited about that. Excited to get started here. Let me go ahead and hit the intro. Well, actually, let's just go ahead and hear from the Billy Bumbler first, because we're obviously into the flashback portion of Wizard and Glass, so we're probably not going to see Oi for a good while. Yeah, let's go ahead and hit the intro and get started.
The Dark Tower by Stephen King. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Go then. There are other worlds than these. Death, but not for you, gunslinger. It's time we had our own palaver, I think, and it's going to take a while.
And yet, dauntless, the slug horn to my lips I set, and blew. Child Roland to the Dark Tower came.
We are content, one from many. Let the palaver begin.
Hello and welcome to Dark Tower Palaver. This is our podcast featuring or covering Stephen King's magnum opus, the Dark Tower series, as well as the entire wider Stephen King universe, because of course all things serve the tower. Everything in Stephen King's universe, one way or another, attaches to the tower because it's all one level of the tower or another. My name is Tad. I'm here as the host to get into 2024's book club series. I can't remember when we finished off the book club last. I guess it would have been the second to last episode. So it would have been the middle week of December, because there was 3 episodes. But yeah, we're here picking up, getting ready for diving into 2024, moving our way through Wizard and Glass. Really excited. Some of the exciting moments of the series are ahead of us here with this book. And yeah, I'm really excited. This is my favorite book of the series, so really excited about it. But first of all, let's hit up the intro stuff first. There is no spoiler warning. We have a very short spoiler section at the very end, but I will make sure you are warned both audibly as well as visually if you're watching on the YouTube side before I get into that. So it'll be very clearly delineated before we move into that spoiler section, and that will be very, very usually it's a very small chunk of the episode, probably 5% or less of the episode. Probably not even that, probably close to 2 or 3%. So there is no spoiler warning with the book clubs. The general thought process is we stay where we're at or before. That way there is no spoiler. So if you were meandering through your first journey of the Dark Tower series, and as long as you were ahead of us, you'd be okay listening to these episodes. Once we've added the spoiler section, obviously you'd have to shut it off when we warn you for the spoilers. But ultimately, if you were, let's say, midway through book 5 right now, you're a book ahead of us. This would be a safe episode. Every book club that we've recorded up to this point would be safe for you to listen to. So yeah, that's kind of how we generally run the show here, and how we've been doing it since day one. We like the idea of being having some spoiler-free areas, because I know a lot of times people, I see it all the time on social media, usually Reddit, where I see first-time readers that are jumping into the subreddits and stuff, which is always dangerous, because I sometimes see spoilers in the titles of posts, because I think people are so excited by the series as they're reading it, even if they're reading it for the first time, they want to dive in and really I don't know, get into it deeper than just the text itself. So I've always liked the idea of having some outlet for people that may not have reached that final page of the final book of the Dark Tower series, and that is the book club series. So next up, if you want to find us, you can find the show on any podcasting service pretty much, but namely Apple Podcasting, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, or any various podcasting service that you have out there. I know before Amazon, Audible, and some of those bigger places, even Spotify got into podcasting. A lot of us have found podcast apps over the years that we really enjoy. We should be available on any of those services. So if you are hitting us up anywhere there, those all work. In the chat, let's see, we've got, let's see, I'm trying to remember. Fourth Legacy, you have to remind me, Peter used to always have the list of decoding the names to who's who. I know you've been with us a number of times, but I'm blanking on the real name we got there. But Heil Kotet, can't wait for the episode and the rest of the book. Dirty Mike, Heil Gunslingers, indeed. And thanks for the emoji, too. Even if Peter isn't here, we can still torment him in spirit by throwing emojis out. I love that. But then also, the rest of the announcements, or the intro stuff, if you want to subscribe, rate, and review us on any of those podcasting services, that would be appreciated. It always helps. And then on the YouTube side, if you want to join the live streams, like the people that I just mentioned that are here listening live, be part of the conversation and the discussion and the shenanigans, you can find us over here at youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. We go live every other week, every fortnight, so long as there's no scheduling conflicts, but do the live streams, but we also post them live, or post them afterwards. So if you can't hit with us live, but you still do want to listen or watch on the YouTube side, that's totally good and understandable. We keep those up there. And if you are doing that and watching in the future, tell us that it is not a Skynet future, hopefully, or North Central Positronics future. You can also throw comments in the video if you have any feedback to give as well, or if you want to be part of the conversation. I know it's after the fact and it's not live, but it is still welcome, of course. And if you want to also be really engaged with it on YouTube here, if you want to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications, that helps. The likes help the algorithm gods, of course, and then if subscribing and ringing the bell for notifications, that helps. Like the first episode, which should have been a fortnight ago, I got sick, had to delay it until last week, and if that kind of thing happens, or something happens, I have to move the show for some reason, your notifications would be the best way to see that. Plus, I usually try to keep at least a month's worth of episodes like scheduled in YouTube, so if I do change something, you could always see the change there as well. Plus, I usually try to post stuff on social media if something's changing. And then if you want to find the show notes, you can do that at darktowerpalaver.com. There's no show notes for book club episodes, but it is the hub for all things Dark Tower Palaver. We have things like the links to all of our social media, all of our merchandise, the Patreon, just everything that is Dark Tower Palaver is there, as well as the questions for new listeners. If you are a new listener, we consider you part of our extended quartet now, and we welcome you. And of course, one thing we found in this series is when a new quartet member joins, there's usually a telling of a story, and those questions are ones that we've built over the years to basically gauge who you are as both a Dark Tower fan and a Stephen King fan. You can answer one of them, you can answer all of them, you can answer anything in between. It's more of just a primer to help you with an introductory email. Find those over there at darktowerpalaver.com. If you want to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/darktowerpalaver. Yesterday, I just recorded the January hangout for Patreon, as well as you get access to the Discord server, where you can chat with, and Peter's still in there whenever he has time to check it, so you can still chat with him a bit, as well as me, throughout the weeks in between the shows, as well as if you're at the highest level, the Dark Tower, or I'm sorry, the Gunslinger of the Eld, you could also guest host an episode, which we'll be hearing some of that in the future this year. And then if you want to contact the show, you can email the show at darktowerpalaver.com. Again, show@darktowerpalaver.com. That is the email. Also, you can hit up the show on Twitter, which is at Facebook, facebook.com/darktowerpalaver, and then on Twitter it's at darktowerpod, and then on Instagram it's darktowerpalaver, all one word. And then that is it for the normal introductions. One thing I wanted to shout out before we dive into the actual book club is I want to warn everyone, or remind everyone, next episode in a fortnight from now, the first episode of February, I am flip-flopping. We usually do roundtable then book club, but we are actually flipping it. So the actual next book club is the next episode a fortnight from now. The reason for that is we are coming down to the wire for our March Insanity fan vote that we've been doing. We've done a couple of times, three times, I think. This will be the fourth year, 2024. We have picked a topic. It is worst Dark Tower moment. And we try to keep that. I guess my thought for that is worst Dark Tower moment, meaning in universe. I can't get too far into it because we're in a spoiler-free podcast right now. But what I want it to be is in universe stuff. Let's say something from book 1, for instance, Roland dropping Jake. That might be a moment that you consider a worst moment because it's pretty terrible. It's things like that. So I want to get your nominations in. We have until that episode, 2 episodes from now, which is the second episode of February. You have up until then to send in your nominations. Because what we do is the 16 that get the most nominations are the ones that get plugged into our Sweet 16 bracket for March Insanity, and then we go weekly and we vote every round all the way until we crown the least favorite, or I guess worst Dark Tower moment is what we're calling it, because so far we've done most beloved character, we've done most hated character, and we've done favorite Dark Tower moment, and now we're doing the inverse of that, which is the worst Dark Tower moment. So send in your nominations, send those in like all the things I just mentioned on social media, send them in on send an email, but do not hesitate on that. You've got basically a little under a month. Let's see, it is February 24th is the day of the episode. It'll be a round table. That's when we'll unveil the bracket. So I'm basically making the 23rd, the Friday before, is the deadline. Anything that comes in social media or email-wise will be counted as part of the, I guess it's the vote to decide who we're voting on. So it's the pre-vote. So get those nominations sent in. I'm really excited for this, as well as we will continue the March Insanity as an annual thing. So Ben in the chat, thank you for reminding me. That is familiar now. Again, that is one of those things that with Peter stepping away, I know he had a little document that he would usually keep track on his side of people to make sure we know who is who. Dirty Mike. Yeah, that's actually one we could talk about. Mike is Oi attacking Jake, the worst moment, and then a winky emoji. Indeed, when Oi viciously attacks Jake on that bridge in the last book, that is indeed one as well. And then David in the chat, do you mean worst moments as in tragic or least favorite due to the quality? I'm hoping it will be in-universe stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be most tragic. I mean, that would be part of it, but it could be stuff like, you just don't like, for instance, we just covered it a few episodes ago in this book club. Rhea's inspection of Susan is a pretty heinous part of the book, and I would imagine that might be a worst moment for some people. And again, we're nominating a bunch of them to then vote down to the number one. So I don't necessarily just need your nominations for what you think is the absolute worst. Just give me a whole list. What are the list of the worst moments? But it could be tragic. It could be gross. It could be anger inducing. It could be just anything that's just, and not necessarily, I don't want it to necessarily be like, oh, well, I hate that, Stephen King chose to do this. I don't necessarily want it to be super meta, because I think that turns into a whole different thing. We didn't do that for best moments either. So I'd like it to be more in-universe if possible. So that is all the announcements. So yeah, thank you for everyone in the chat as well, giving some clarifications and stuff, questions, as well as some examples. So yeah, there's plenty of options there. I'm looking forward to getting that all sussed out, but I will mention it this time and I will mention it next time, as well as I'm trying to make sure to mention it on social media semi-regularly so we get as many nominations in as possible so everyone has their say to determine what will be on the brackets. So moving on over here then to the book itself. We are in Wizard and Glass, which is the 4th book of the Dark Tower series. We are on part 9. The 9th episode of this Wizard and Glass book club series. We are currently on so there's parts to this book. Part 1 was Riddles, I think was the title of it. Was that what it was? Yes, part 1 was Riddles. Part 2 is subtitled Susan. And within part 2, we are currently on chapter 4, which was subtitled Long After Moonset. Last time, right before we ended, we covered subchapter 1 of this chapter, which was Roland. Roland trying to thinking through stuff after the meeting with Susan, and then falling asleep at their camp. That is where we ended 2023, and we are picking up now in the next subchapter, which is subchapter 2. And I will warn that we are jumping from chapter 4 to chapter 5 in this episode. All these chapters are different lengths, so they don't always fit neatly into one episode. Sometimes we have to kind of have multiple jump chapters in the middle of an episode, which we'll be doing here. So jumping into subchapter 2, like I said, Roland fell asleep in their camp thinking about Susan. They have now arrived in Magus, and he met Susan coming back from Rhea's inspection, and now we are jumping into subchapter 2, which is the other half of this, which is Susan after all this shenanigans, good and bad for her. So starting off with a recap here, about 5 miles from where Roland lay dreaming, Susan laid in her bed looking at old stars, showing the signs that dawn was coming, and she was no closer to sleep now than she had been when she laid down. She was throbbing where the hag had touched her, but it was no longer unpleasant, as she now associated it with the boy that she impulsively kissed on the road. When she had come home, Aunt Cord, who should have been in bed at least an hour before, by that time, was sitting awake. She did not look up when Susan entered, but she did. She said she expected her an hour ago, and that she was worried, although her voice showed no sign of worry. Susan only replied with I, and thought that on any other night she would have offered a fumbling excuse that always sounded like a lie even to her own ears. But it was the effect that Cord had on her. But it was not a normal night. This wasn't a normal night. No night in her life had been like this. She could not get Will Dearborn out of her mind. Aunt Cord asked what took her so long and if there was trouble. Susan told her there wasn't, but tried to remember what Rhea had said at the end when she said there was one last thing before she was leaving. But she couldn't remember what Rhea had said. But what did matter, she did not have to see the witch until she was pregnant, which likely wouldn't be until late winter, which felt like an age from now. She told Aunt Cord that she walked slowly coming back. Aunt Cord asked why she looked so. Susan asked how so, and Cord said flush, frothy, like fresh milk from a cow. Susan almost laughed because Cord knew about as much about men as Susan did about stars and planets, which that's funny. I like that. She told Cord it was the night air, and she saw a meteor and heard the thinny. Cord ignored all that and asked if it hurt. Susan said a little, of course, referring to Rhea and her inspection. Cord asked if she cried, and Susan shook her head, and Cord told her that is good because Rhea likes it when they cry, and asked if she gave her something, and Susan agreed. I'm going to keep mixing that up. One of these days I'm going to get it right. And pulled out the square paper that said honest, which of course is spelled Onest, and Cord swiped it quickly. Cord then began to then it goes on kind of in a weird internal thing of Susan's mind. She thinks to herself that Cord had been, quote, quite the sugar plum the last month or so, but now that she had what she wanted and Susan had come too far to back out of it now, she is probably going to be returning to being the sour, superfluous, suspicious woman that Susan had grown up with. The one who had weekly bouts of rage because of her devil-may-care brother. Susan thought the inevitable return to form would be a relief because it had been nerve-wracking having Aunt Cord be so nice. So that is the first little chunk here. I will say that we've already been hearing a little bit about Aunt Cord. We heard, I think, if I remember right, there was a small conversation about her with Rhea, as well as in Susan's internal monologue as she was walking. We did hear some stuff about. I feel like we've been introduced to Aunt Cord before actually getting to meet her in person and in the flesh here. It kind of reminds me of Silence of the Lambs, the classic movie from 1991. The whole first probably 12 minutes or so of that movie is basically hyping you up and talking up Hannibal Lecter as a character. So by the time Clarice moves past that precipice to where she can actually see him, I feel like we as an audience are just absolutely jonesed up to actually see. Okay, I've heard so much about this guy already. Now let's see him. And I feel like it's kind of that way with the way King structured this, where we're kind of seeing. I think we've got a sense that Aunt Cord is not necessarily a wonderful person, even before seeing her. But now that we're actually seeing her, we're seeing some of that as well. Even just that last little chunk in Susan's mind as she was talking about how she had been kind of sweet and nice the last month or so. But now she's probably going to return to being kind of a not great person. My other notes on this. Let's see. In the chat, David said, I guess I would consider that disturbing. Worse seems a bit vague, but I think I get what you're saying. Okay, yeah. And I think more people have had a little bit more issue understanding, so maybe my phrasing on the March Insanity is a little bit poor, but I was trying to mirror the best Dark Tower moment as much as possible. But it's not just you, David. There's a lot of people, it seems, that are needing some clarification on it. So that's probably my bad. Maybe I should have looked for more clarity versus just trying to mirror the other one that we did previous. So my next note, moving from Roland being all worked up, but then going to sleep. Eventually we get to Susan here some miles away, but she is unable to sleep as dawn is approaching. So it's probably been a while now that she's been laying in bed, not being able to sleep. It's just kind of interesting to see the different dichotomy there. Roland obviously has stuff on his mind. He thinks about his mom. He thinks about meeting Susan. He thinks about kind of the mission. And then after a bit, he just kind of falls asleep. Whereas Susan is, fixated on her predicament, her future, her being promised to the mayor, as well as her aunt, her father that's died, the Rhea. There's just a lot going with in her mind as well. But for her, she is not able to ultimately fall asleep like Roland did in that last subchapter that we covered at mid-December mid last month. And the other thing about this is the way that this juxtapositions the two, and it says like 5 miles away. I could almost picture what that looks like on screen too, if it was a movie. Like whether it's like Roland and you see him and like it just pulls up and pans out and then like moves over as like a big sweeping shot over to like the town, and then I know that would be like really elaborate, but then zooms into like the house that Susan's in. I don't know why. I just picture that. I feel like it's something we've all seen in usually cartoons because it's easier to animate that than it is to actually shoot it. But you also see shots like that at times where you kind of, rather than actually edit, you have some sort of sweeping shot that brings you from one character to another. I almost picture that when I was reading this. I also love that they are on each other's mind, but they both have other far more negative and heavy things on their mind, and things that you would hope that kids of their age would not have to worry about. Because I do think that we're getting that we got an impression on the last episode or two that Susan is a bit older than Roland. Roland we know is 14. Susan's a little bit older, maybe 15 or 16. Either way, though, both of these are children in most of our minds. All of our minds. In our world, they're children. I don't know, obviously, what it looks like in their world. She's obviously being promised in marriage, being underage. In our minds, that seems kind of icky, but I don't know what it looks like in this world. Obviously, it's a completely different planet, so we don't know what their customs and stuff are. Obviously, she's not happy with the predicament, but it doesn't seem like it's necessarily like this isn't a strange thing to the culture that it's seeming like. The fact that Rhea, the way that Rhea talked in the last or 2 episodes, I think 2 or 3 episodes ago, when Rhea was talking about the whole inspection and looking for purity and honesty, she talked in a way like this isn't like the first time she had done this, but it seems like it's one of the main things that she does as a service to the town is inspects people, which sounds gross, but so it's definitely kind of a normal thing, unfortunately. Then my next note, I also feel like King has painted a good picture of Aunt Cord before we ever set eyes on her. Once we do meet her, once we do meet her, there are things that we are seeing from her, either directly or through Susan's internal thoughts, that pretty much has us understanding kind of who she is. I don't think that there's a lot of ambiguity. I think a lot of us by this point we already kind of understand that Aunt Cord is not necessarily the best person and probably doesn't have Susan's best interest at heart. And it also probably gives us a good insight as to what Susan's life has been since her father died, which I know was a number of years ago. I don't remember the exact number, but we covered it a last episode or two when she'd mentioned it to Rhea. So going on, Cord points out that Rhea's mark on the scrap of paper. And it says that some say that is the mark of a devil's hoof, but she doesn't really care. She then calls Rhea a horrid creature, but one that is making it possible for 2 women to get on in the world a bit longer. She then says Susan will not need to see her again until year's end, and Susan tells her that it will be much later than that, and she is not to go to Thorn until after reaping fair and the bonfire. Cord is shocked, upset, and disappointed all in one go, and asks why so long. Susan knew there had already been 8 pieces of silver and 4 pieces of gold, all tucked away wherever Cord hid the money, which Susan suspected that there was plenty of, even if Cord liked to claim poverty. And Susan knew that twice as much was still owed and would not be paid in full until after she was proven pregnant and the pregnancy honest by Rhea. A lot of money all told, and she knew that Cord was upset that the final payoff had been delayed, and that is why she was so upset. Susan would later pray unenthusiastically over the sin that she commits here, as she enjoys the cheated and frustrated look on Cord's face. And I would pause and say, don't worry, Susan, I don't think that's a sin. I think most of us are right along with you there and enjoying Cord being upset. So Cordelia asks again. She asks why so long, and Susan says that she can go up the coos and ask Rhea herself if she wants, and Cord asks if she is being pert, and Susan says she's too tired to be pert, and she wants to just be washed and go to bed. Cordelia tells her to go ahead. When Cordelia begins to put her the paper in her own pocket, Susan stops her and tells her that she was told that she was to hold the paper, and Cordelia asks who said so in a whining, outraged voice, and Susan tells her she knows damn well who. Cordelia complains, but gives it over, and there's a little bit more snipping back and forth between the two before Susan finally goes up and goes to bed. So again, King's done a good job of setting us up to understand kind of who Cordelia is, so I don't think that there's a lot of sympathy for her necessarily. In fact, like I kind of just alluded to, I think Susan's enjoying the disappointment and whatever in Cordelia, and I think that we as readers, even as first-time readers, are probably feeling the same thing because King did enough peppering of stuff in there for us to know that we're probably not going to be sympathetic to this woman. So my notes here, I love the rumors of what Rhea's mark is. That just feels so damn real to me. Some of my childhood, especially being pre-internet, I remember so many urban legends and just such things like that all over the place. So I just feel very, this feels like legit to me. And I know mine are a little bit different than what it would be in a little bit more of a antiquated setting where people probably believe way more. I don't want to say believe in like it's not, because we know Roland's world does actually have demons and all kinds of weird creatures we've already seen. We've seen succubuses, we've seen speaking demons, we've heard Roland refer to possessed machines, and then of course later we saw Blaine, which may have actually been a payoff to the idea of a possessed machine. So we've seen a lot of crazy stuff. So I guess maybe for them it isn't superstition like it would be for us, where you hear about, oh, I heard about this killer or whatever. There's always these weird urban legend fun things. I feel like that just feels a lot like my childhood, just a little bit different because it's a different setting, obviously. So my next note, more is revealed about Cord. She is one that loves to cry poverty, but has squirreled away plenty. And when we see that Cord is getting the money for Thorin's exchange, it makes this all pretty icky. Like there's not any kind of divide. It's not like Susan is going to get any of this money that is being paid for her, basically. She's basically being sold as a second wife, or a replacement wife for Thorin, and the fact that Cordelia seems to be the one that's going to be receiving all this money, that just feels very icky. My next note, I don't know Cord that much yet. Again, I've already mentioned we've got enough of an indication, but I do have enough there to be overjoyed to see how upset she is, and I share with Susan's joy there as well for Cordelia being upset and not getting her way in her own timeline. I have to say, between the setup of what we saw and heard before the meeting of Cord and now that we are seeing her, like I said, I think I've already alluded to this, but I'm loathing this person already. I remember the first time, even by getting to this point, I'm just like, cheering for Susan to say way worse things than she actually says, because I don't know, Cordelia just rubs me the wrong way right from the get-go. Also happy that some elements of the Rhea stuff is helping Susan stick it to Cord a bit. Of course, not that it makes up for the violation that went along with Rhea, but at least that element of having to wait, as well as the keeping of the note. Those are two small, tiny things, silver linings of a really nasty cloud that Susan's able to kind of use against Cordelia, which is kind of a wonderful thing. The next little bit here, the rest of the subchapter, the night's events flowed in from in front of Susan like a shuffling deck of cards. And the thing that stuck out the most was Will Dearborn. She asked why she should meet him now, when no good can come of it. A voice tells her that if it is caught, it will come like a cyclone. She is tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. She figured if she could not sleep, she may as well get up and walk out on the drop and watch the sun come up. But she continues to lay there and think about the kiss on the road. With that thought, she begins to touch herself. She thought that she could sleep if she could take care of that heat. If she knew how, she could take care of the heat if she knew how. But then she realized she did know how because Rhea had shown her. Her hand moved under the covers, and she pushed the face of Rhea from her mind and focused on his face. Her imagination was so stark it was like it was reality. She burned in her bed like a torch, and when the sun rose a short time later, she was deeply asleep with a smile on her lips. So I do want to just, of course, point out the idea that this voice that comes to her, and it's written in a way to where it's not just her internal monologue, because it's actually like italicized and stuff. It's very reminiscent of every time we've seen Court's voice in Roland's head, or when we've seen Henry's voice in Eddie's head. Every time we've seen some of that internal monologue where it's like somebody else speaking to them, usually it's presented in that way. So that voice that's coming to her and saying that if it is caught, it will come like a cyclone, is that, but it's not necessarily telling us whose voice it is. I would assume it's probably her father, but I'm not entirely sure, because it doesn't overtly state it. But I do love that idea too, that it gives me chills thinking about it, because it says if it is caught, it will come like a cyclone. That is a very, very powerful way to describe it, because obviously cyclones are very disruptive. I mean, like it's like a natural disaster essentially. Like it's not going to leave anything in its wake. It's just going to come and destroy everything a lot of times. So to attribute cause coming to a cyclone gives us an idea that I think we've heard the idea that cause like the wind. We've heard some different things about it's something you can't really fight against, but I don't know that we've necessarily had it stated quite this boldly, that cause like a cyclone. So I think that that gives us an idea of what these folks view Ka as in their worldview. Let's see. And then Agamorphy says Susanna is shining. I think, do you mean Susan? Because I keep making that mistake too in saying Susanna. And then Agamorphy also says Cyclone alludes to Wizard of Oz, and that's certainly true. We've seen a bit of different things popping up from different pop culture references, not pop culture, but literary references as well. This is Stephen King, so of course it would be the Wizard of Oz book, probably more so than the movie, but we talked about that. Was it earlier in this book when it got brought up, and then Roland was like talking about wanting to hear about it. Someone described the movie, but then someone described the book. So like we kind of get a sense of the larger sense. But yeah, so Wizard of Oz is already kind of figured a little bit largely. If it wasn't in the beginning of this book, it was at the very tail end of the last book. So either way, it's kind of fresh in our minds if we're reading it straight through. Of course, we are in the reality of release dates. This is like a 7-year window between the books, so maybe it isn't as fresh for a first-time reader if they didn't go back and reread book 3 before reading this one for the first time. But for us, that is just kind of chugging through this quickly, so to speak, when we're talking about Mr. Blaine, of course. But yeah, the Wizard of Oz has already been alluded to a little bit very recently, so that's definitely a good call, Agamorphy. And then confirmed, yes, met Susan. I'm glad I'm not the only one that continually makes that mistake. And it's funny because I think I've done the same thing throughout these book club series, dating back to book 2. I think there's been a number of times I've called Susanna Susan. I mean, I guess not book 2 because she wasn't called Susanna in book 2. So book 3, all of last book, or at least early last book, there was a number of times that I keep dropping the name Susan instead of Susanna, and then here a couple times in this episode already I've said Susanna when I should be saying Susan. So yes, and it's okay because Susanna called that out when Roland was saying the name and stuff. Susanna said, I want to hear the story about the girl that shares my name, so I know it's not the exact same name, but it's certainly close enough for government work. So then my note here, and then my next note and my last note for this subchapter, honestly, with everything that's happened to Susan over the course of the night between Rhea and Cordelia, I am so glad that she is able to not only sleep, but sleep with a smile. And of course, that only comes because of the chance or Ka meeting of Roland on the road. If not for that, this would have been a really, really, really terrible night for her, with a lot of nastiness, both physical and psychological and mental, from two women here that are not wonderful people, Rhea and Cordelia. We talked about the March Insanity stuff. Of course, the first one we ever did in 2019 was Most Hated Character, and I might say we can't necessarily talk about why, but I want to say that Rhea and Cordelia may have been very, very deep in that bracket challenge as the worst Dark Tower characters. So we're in for a fun one with two characters here that have already been shown to be absolutely deplorable. Just in general, Rhea's just nasty. Just everything about her was pretty bad, and Cordelia is not proving it much better up to this point. So let's move on over to subchapter 3. So subchapter 3. The last hours before dawn, the gaslit public room of the Traveler's Rest was quiet. One corner laid a jumble of kindling, the remains of chairs smashed over a watch me game, and the combatants were in the High Sheriff's drunk cell, I guess is the phrasing. Of course, in our world, we'd call it a drunk tank. Another corner was a large puddle of congealed puke. That just feels perfectly like Stephen King, of course. I feel like there's very few people that still maintain that 5-year-old little boy aspect of the ew factor that little boys seem to love. I think King, even later into his adulthood, was always able to hold on to that. Of course, we've seen some pretty nasty stuff, even in recent books that King's put out in the last couple of years, where he's a man in his 70s. It seems like he still kind of holds that inner child that can just, for some reason, put out really nasty things like a large puddle of congealed puke. So on a raised platform on one side of the room was a piano. Barky, the bouncer, and Tough Man laid sleeping under the bench, snoring. The other end of the room were the card tables, with two drunks passed out with heads down on one of these tables. Above them was a picture of Arthur Eld on a white horse with a sign that read, "Argue not about the hand you are dealt in cards or life." And I do have to point out that they the spelling of that is for argue is not as we would spell it, much like so many things we've seen in Roland's world so far. Even words that we pronounce the same and they pronounce the same, they end up spelling differently. It's kind of a low speech thing, I think. But it's argue is spelled ARGYOU. So that's a fun one. But that's also an interesting idea as well, kind of a fortune cookie thing from Arthur Eld, I would assume, since the quote is mentioned with the picture. I think they're probably connected in some way. But argue not about the hand you are dealt in cards or in life. I think that's a good truism that we could even take in our own lives here outside of Roland's world. Behind the bar, there was a massive trophy, a two-headed elk with massive antlers. This was known as the Romp to the locals, not that anyone could remember why. Laying on the bar was Petty the Trotter, one of the dancers and Gilly girls, though her girlhood was long behind her. A small table sat near the Batwing doors, which went out onto the high street of Hanbury. At this table by the Batwing doors, Coral Thorin, who owned the rest, would sit when she wanted to, quote, be part of the company, which was always earlier when more steak was being served than whiskey. She would then go back up around the time that Sheb sat down at the piano and began to play. The mayor never came into this place, even though he owned at least half of the establishment. Clan Thorin enjoyed the money the place brought in, but they didn't really like the look of it after midnight when the sawdust soaked up spilled beer and blood. Spilled beer and spilled blood is how it is worded in the text. Though Coral did have a hard streak in her, as decades before she had been known as a wild child. No one sat at her table when the bar was opened, but it was not open now. Sheb was sleeping behind his piano. The quote soft-headed boy who cleaned the place up would have been gone since 2 o'clock, chased out by the jeers and flying beer glasses, as he always was. Roy DePape had no love for the boy. The boy would be back around 9. Until then, the man at Coral's table had the place to himself. So there's a lot there. We were obviously at the Traveler's Rest. We heard reference to the Traveler's Rest last episode. I think it was mentioned. I believe Roland and Susan heard music coming from it, and so we kind of got an idea that it's probably a bar type establishment. So we heard about it from afar, and now we're actually seeing inside of it and getting a very vivid picture painted for us to us from Mr. Stephen King. My notes here, again, what a picture painted here by King at this new location. We heard reference to it earlier. Now we're seeing it. King does so well here that I feel like you can not only see it, but I feel like you could also smell it, and you could also hear it. Like what it sounds like when it's crowded. Like I feel like this is like a very three-dimensional thing in my mind. Like it all, I could kind of see how it's laid out. But again, just like I could just almost smell the reek of it. The sawdust, the fact that there's going to be beer and whiskey and puke and blood all over the place. You just kind of know what the place like that would smell like. A lot of probably people that probably don't have good hygiene. I feel like this is a very real setting in my mind. I think King did a wonderful job, and I don't even think he necessarily went full bore into things like the odor and stuff, but I think he's given us enough here to where we can kind of paint the picture, paint between the lines, and understand what this place looks like, and as well as the fact that Coral Thorin that owns the place, the mayor, her brother, owns half of it as well. The mayor would never step foot in this place, and she would only step foot in it early, but then when it gets later, she will never be seen there as well. It also kind of gives us an idea that this is not a place that you probably just want to go in as an outsider that wasn't someone that could really handle themselves. This is kind of like a dive bar. I think in our world we hear about those too, those kind of bars you wouldn't want to be at unless you were a very hard person that was willing to fight and defend yourself because the bar is really rough. This sounds like one of those. In short, the way I synopsize my next note, in short, this seems like a hard place with hard people doing hard drinking and breaking chairs and spilling blood on the regular. I don't get the sense that these broken chairs, puke puddles and blood seeping into the sawdust. None of those things seem like, oh God, last night was really rough. It just feels like that all comes off to me as very normal. Like that's a very normal thing. Also, we heard about, the character we're about to be introduced to, in his mind said the soft-headed boy who cleaned the place would have been gone since 2, and he was chased out by jeers and flying beer glasses as he always was. That states a lot there, that's not a one-time thing, but that happens to him pretty much every night. Arthur Eld picture and quote is interesting. We have mostly heard it from the purview of Roland and the gunslingers, so it's interesting to see it in the context like this, in this place that we are getting the sense is a very out of the way, away off the beaten path place. So the fact that they've obviously hold some reverence for Arthur Eld as well, it just speaks to the society a little bit, I guess. It's one thing to probably be in Gilead and some that we've seen some indication of. We've obviously kind of know what it's like in Roland's mind and how he views it. But, it's kind of like the further you are from, the center of power, the more loose things get. And the fact that, you're away from it here, this is a place that they may just completely not care about the idea of Arthur Eld. But the fact they do have that up on the wall, I think at least says something about them sociologically. Even in this world, even if the world is moving on, there is still some reverence for old stories, at least nominally. So the mayor is part owner and his sister runs it. Interesting to get a better idea of the lay of the land of this town, because again, if he's a mayor, he's then a elected official. That means that he's got to be someone that is going to have to not that they have cameras here, but he's got to get pictures taken with babies, and he's got to be someone that people would continually elect. So owning a place like this, the fact that that's not a problem for him tells us a little bit something about this society that they have in this town. And then my next note, it talks about the soft-headed boy who cleaned the place and that he is regularly chased out with hurled beers and jeers. That is very sad. Because soft-headed boy is probably a way of saying he's probably mentally challenged, and they hire him to clean the place, and every single night it sounds like he is chased out by projectile beers and yelling and all kinds of stuff. That's a very sad state of affairs for anyone, let alone someone that is mentally disabled. In my last note, we have a man flouting the norms and sitting at a table that it basically says that no one dares to sit at. I think that speaks a lot to the nature of this person. Just, like, because I know it said that nobody sits there when the place is open, but it's I don't know. I think that maybe that's like why he would sit there, but I would wonder, is there anyone else that would sit there even when the place is closed, or would they be there when the place is closed? So I think it says a little bit something about this person. But let's go ahead to the next part of the section here that starts talking about this man. And it goes on and says the man is playing a game of patience, which seems like which in my mind, and this is my editorializing, seems like a version of solitaire is kind of how I read this. Earlier we saw Watch Me was the game that the chairs were smashed over. As I'm reading this, I always just plug things in immediately. So for me, Watch Me, I was like, that's probably poker. Then we're talking about patience, which seems like a version of solitaire. This man is alone and he's playing a game with cards. Solitaire is probably the most famous thing in our world of a game that you can play by yourself with a deck of cards. He is flipping through the cards in one hand. His right hand has a coffin tattoo on it, and it seems to be breathing with the movement of his hand. He is old-ish, not as thin as Coral Thorin, but he has long white hair going down to his back. He is deeply tanned except for his neck, where he always burns. His white mustache hung almost to his jaw in a sham gunslinger mustache, as many thought of it. But no one would ever say that to the face of Elder Jonas. So now we have his introduction for his name. We're getting a very good description of him. He had a revolver on his hips. His eyes looked sad at first, but only on further looking did you realize they were only watery. They were watery, although despite being watery, they were as emotionless as the eyes of the romp. So the large stuffed two-headed elk, his eyes are as emotionless as that creature. His voice is wavery, like someone about to cry. A door opened upstairs and closed softly. He put his cards down and his hand went to his gun. He then recognized the sound of the boots coming down as that of Reynolds, and he moved his hand away from his gun and grabbed his tobacco pouch instead. Reynolds came down wearing the cloak that he always wore. His face was freshly washed below his curly red hair. Reynolds had been with more women than Jonas, even though he was half his age. So we're getting a little bit of an indicator of Reynolds' character. He's wearing a cloak. He's got red hair, red curly hair, and he is a heavy womanizer, someone that will have lapped a man double his age in body count, so to speak, for women. He squeezed one of Petty's plump thighs. Again, Petty was passed out on the bar. As he came toward Jonas, a smoke is offered. Reynolds accepts and dances around his fingers. A gunslinger trick, which the Big Coffin Hunters seem to have a lot of. Of course, we've seen the finger trick with Roland. He used that with the bullet to hypnotize Jake a number of times now. So that's obviously something we're very familiar with. I always see it, and every time I see that in my head, I always think of Val Kilmer has done that in a number of his movies. The one that always comes to mind for me, though, is Tombstone, which of course fits this being a Western. But yeah, Val Kilmer is able to do that thing where you kind of coast like a coin or something on your fingers. So anytime that's ever mentioned in this story, in the previous books or even right here, I always think of Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday from Tombstone. My notes here, we are getting a good look at Jonas and connecting that to this, connecting this to who we understood was talking to Rhea before Susan. When we were with Rhea before Susan showed up, we heard that she had basically just finished a meeting. She had 2 appointments that night. The one before was, the Big Coffin Hunters, and now we're kind of getting a description of Jonas, which was one of those that brought the ball to her. And then, of course, Susan was her second appointment of the night. So now we're kind of getting a little bit more about the person that met with Rhea earlier before Susan. Jonas has guns. It seems in the future where we are with Roland, where he's telling the story. I would call that the present, right? Where Blaine is just recently killed. That's the present. In that time, it seems that everything we've seen with Roland so far, guns are very rare. So often it seems like even Roland's people seeing Roland's guns shock people. Of course, there's an element of Roland's guns being looking like royal and regal. Like I think they project the idea of gunslingers, but I don't feel like we've seen like a shitload of like lower end guns throughout this world. Of course, there is one aspect of this that we are now in a flashback time. It is before the world is fully moved on. So maybe like lesser guns are a little bit more common now. But it is interesting because this is one of the first times that we've seen guns that are not gunslinger guns. That I don't know. It's just, yeah, it's been a very gun-starved world. I don't think Roland's world is full of a lot of guns. We've seen some people that have claimed to have, you know, different whatever, but it seems like it's a little bit more primitive weaponry, and guns are very rare. So seeing someone here with one is very interesting to see, and it also adds a little bit of danger to this man, because something that we haven't necessarily, I mean, I guess we saw a gun with like Andrew Quick had a couple, like a small little gun and then that machine gun, but there just hasn't been an abundance of guns as they move through. Sometimes Roland's gun itself is like kind of his ID to prove who he is, so having somebody else with guns is interesting. And then Reynolds always wearing a cloak. That feels different than what we usually picture with Westerns, and it doesn't necessarily feel like anything that we've seen even in this story up to this point. I don't think there's been anything that would show us that cloaks or capes or things like that are necessarily normal in this world. So Reynolds is a bit unique with that. And then my next note here, I don't remember where I ever heard this phrase back in the day, like probably, you know, back in like the early 2000s, but maybe it was even last decade, the 2010s. But the note I have here is Reynolds, it seems, is a he-whore. So that is a phrase I heard from an older person. I don't remember. I can't place exactly, but it's one that always made me laugh. And it is indeed true that Mr. Reynolds is a not a philanderer, because he's not married, but he is one that enjoys the company of women a lot. So the Big Coffin Hunters have a lot of gunslinger tricks. That's also an interesting thing to say, and that is also very disconcerting, because if they are even a fraction as dangerous as we have so far seen gunslingers to be, they are probably going to end up being trouble. You know, Roland, again, we've seen a number of people that we've come up against in this series so far, and it doesn't seem like very often Roland has had anyone near his match of his abilities. Obviously now we're talking about Roland that's only 14 years old. Yes, he's earned his guns, but he is still a child, and this is his first real mission. And now you're introducing me to people that are seemingly hard case people. One of them has guns, and then they are having many gunslinger tricks. All of that is spelling out to be this can be trouble, for sure. So then going on here, Jonas asks where Roy is at, and asks if he is with Nibs. It then says that they had been in Hambry for a little over a month, and Roy DePape. I know I think I keep switching back and forth between first and last names with these guys. But he asks where Roy DePape is at, and it says in the time in the month they've been here, DePape has fallen for a 15-year-old bow-legged whore named Deborah. That was kind of a bit high-hatted is the word that is used. So I think she's a little bit, you know, maybe prim and proper, especially for being a sex worker. And Clay started calling her Nibs or Her Majesty. Clay Reynolds then tells Jonas that Roy seems drunk on her, and Jonas says that he will be all right. He won't throw them over for her. Jonas mentions that he heard a horse 20 minutes ago, first coming, then going, and asks if that would have been one of their hired watchmen. And Clay says that he doesn't miss anything, and Jonas says of course he doesn't, because it doesn't pay to. And Clay is what I meant to say, confirms that it was indeed one of theirs, and he says that he wrote in to report that they saw 3 young babbies riding in, but says that they are nothing to worry about. Jonas says that they don't know that, and young eyes can see far. Clay says that young eyes see only what they're pointed at. Jonas says maybe, maybe not. They are affiliation brats, son of a big estate. If Reimer and the fool he has working for him have it right. If that is the case, they need to be very careful, walk on eggshells, as they have been around, or as they have to be around for another 3 months at least. Here in Hambry for the Big Coffin Hunters, says we basically have 3 months we still have to be here, so we have to be very careful. And those young ones might be here the whole time counting this and that and putting it down on paper. People counting is not good for men in the resupply business. Clayton says, or Clay, I keep saying Clayton, goddammit. Clay says that it is busy work, a slap on the wrist for getting in trouble. Jonas says their dad's no farce and is in charge of the whole Southwest and is sitting on high ground. And the boys might know the same, and he says that the affiliation cannot know what they are doing here, and they will get a better sense of the boys when they meet them. for the first time. He then says that they can't kill them because and he says they can't kill them if they see the wrong thing, because their fathers might be mad at them alive, but they will be very tender for them dead, and because that's how dads work. He then says they need to be trig as they can be. Clayton says to leave Roy out of it then. So that's an interesting little character thing. Clay has already mentioned a couple times being concerned about Roy's dedication because of his relationship with Nibs. So, he says we got to be trig, and he says, okay, leave Roy out of it. I just think that's very, I didn't put a note down for that, but I think that is very telling about kind of giving us the dynamic of what this threesome looks like at the Big Coffin Hunters. And Jonas says that he will be fine. So he's very it seems like he's defending Roy quite a bit. He then asks, he then asked that their scout said the boys arrived tonight, and Clayton confirmed. Jonas says that they will be in town the next day to see Avery, who he tells us is the High Sheriff Magus, and is a fat man. That's the things that we get from the conversation here, or Jonas's internal monologue as well. To show him they will come in to the sheriff to show him their papers. It says that Reynolds did not answer. He did not always track exactly what Jonas was talking about, but he had ridden with him since he was 15 years old, and he knew that it was better not to ask for clarification, or you were apt to get a long lecture about many doors that led to other worlds. So that's a very interesting thing. As people that have read this story, we all know of actual doors we've seen in this story that go to our world. So it's very interesting that he's worried about getting lectures from Jonas about many doors to go to the world. So it sounds like Jonas is clued into the idea of these door between worlds, and maybe there was more than just the 3 that Roland discovered. So my notes here, so they've been in town for about a month and might be there as long as another 3, maybe a little bit more. That gives us an interesting timeline there. So they're not necessarily here for the long haul, and they haven't been here long. They set up the people to report any comings and goings, and Roland and his Tet were spotted and reported to these men. That says a lot about them too. If these guys were just innocent dudes, just, chilling and doing whatever, and obviously there's more, because he'll end up saying that they got to be careful because they can't be discovered in what they're doing. So we know there's something going on, but even before that, the fact that there is even a watch there kind of tips the hand that shit, these guys are up to something, because they're hiring people to basically spy the whole lay of the land and let them know that if anything happens. So they're obviously very concerned about their being discovered with whatever they're up to, what shenanigans there is afoot for them. My next note, Clay is concerned about and might not entirely trust Roy because he is infatuated with the sex worker, Deborah, or Nibs. And we kind of get the idea, and I think that it was mentioned in Rhea's section when she talked about the 3 men that came, and she said that when she spotted Roland in the glass, she thought that it was she thought about the 3 men that had come to her hut and said that it was, he looked younger than even the youngest of them. So I think we kind of got the sense that there's Jonas that's older than the other 2 are a bit younger to different degrees, but both of them are younger. I think that's always interesting too, when you see like the relationship dynamic there, because it seems like Clay's not trusting Roy, but is that really because he doesn't trust him, or is it because he doesn't like him and he wants to stay in like the higher graces of Jonas than and not be like kind of usurped by Roy? I don't know, and I know that's reading a lot into the text, but that's an interesting character dynamic that we've seen throughout literature, pop culture, reality. I mean, that's just a normal thing, right? When you've got like the person that's a little bit more in command, that kind of has their favorite, person, and then as time goes, they end up finding another favorite person, and the old favorite person may resent that and may try to like backbite to maintain their situation, their position. So I know that's reading into the text as of right now, but that is something that definitely comes to mind with just the fact that Clay is now, at least 2 or 3 times has mentioned not trusting Roy or being concerned about him. That's very interesting. So they're already filling in the blanks of the cover story that the boys have. that they are ashamed and they're here to rehab their reputations. So it does seem like the cover story that was come up with for the boys, for Roland and his Tet, is a good cover story because people are already picking up on it. It seems like it's kind of a shorthand in their society. I think that they kind of understand if you got people, especially a little bit more higher born people, that are sent to do a menial task like this. A lot of people kind of understand what the implications are of that, and these guys are already piecing that together, which is interesting. And it shows, again, it kind of exposes what that society looks like and the fact that kind of exists in this world. So they are nervous about the affiliation folks seeing what they're up to, and they said they're in the, quote, resupply business. This makes me very suspicious and curious as to what these people are up to. Resupply business, not wanting to get spotted by the affiliation. I think reading between the lines there, it feels like they're probably against the affiliation then, and resupply business and not wanting to get caught. I don't know what that all means, but resupply makes me think they may be raising supplies for the opposite side. Resupply business is just a very, very specific term that wouldn't necessarily mean a whole lot else. So King is dropping us some hints here with these characters, and it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out as the story unfolds here. So then Jonas also giving lectures on many doors that go to other worlds, and I just put whoa. That's kind of crazy because again we kind of know that that's a reality, and it also, I think that also spells a lot about Jonas too. Like we're kind of seeing him as this hard man. He's this guy, whatever. He's a hard case. He's had debate or he's had Clay Reynolds with him since Clay was 15, and he's obviously a hard case as well. So it's like we kind of see, I don't know, I just feel like I almost picture these guys like this world's version of like bikers, that could be hired to do terrible things if they need to, and so someone then to be plugged into the idea of many doors that go to the worlds, that just doesn't feel like it jives, but I think that's good because it makes for an interesting character, right? It's like, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but it's like, having like some massive, maybe even like let's look at like the movie Leon the Professional with Natalie Portman and Jean Reno. Jean Reno is this hitman, but one of his favorite things is just taking care of a potted plant. That just doesn't feel like it fits. Like you feel like someone that would be a cold-blooded assassin murderer would not necessarily give a shit about trying to keep a plant alive, but that's what makes him interesting, is you take something that's so antithetical to his nature and make that part of him. And I think having Jonas buying into this whole idea of many doors going to other worlds is an interesting dichotomy for his character. Jonas says that he will speak with Reimer, and then Reimer will speak with Avery about where the boys should stay. And Jonas says that the bunkhouse at the Bar K Ranch. The Bar K is a landmark in the area, but it was deserted, and it was northwest of town, not far from the Thinny Canyon. 1 year they tried to burn the mouth of the canyon, and the fire got out of control, and it burned most of the Bar K Ranch to the ground. And the bunkhouse is one of the few things that was spared. Jonas thought that it was a good place for them. It was far enough from the drop and the oil patch. Reynolds asked about the trucks, the tankers. He's like, the trucks, what do we call them? The tankers. Jonas said that they are fine where they are, and they couldn't move them now anyway without attracting attention. And he said, so DePape and Reynolds should go and cover them with brush the day after tomorrow. Reynolds asked where Jonas would be at while they were out there doing all that hard work. Jonas told him he'd be getting ready for the welcome dinner that they would throw for the boys, where he would go to gather intelligence about the boys, as well as get a read on them. He also talks about getting a town gossip in his good graces. He talks about smoozing up to one of them, and then he asks, Reynolds asks if he has someone in mind, and he says, indeed, Cordelia Delgado. So now suddenly things are connecting to characters that we already know, which Reynolds responds to the last name. He recognizes it. Jonas says, yes, the mayor's soon-to-be Jilly is her niece. He talked about how Cordelia is not super good looking, so he will go and compliment her and then keep her wine glass full, and that would probably get him any information out of her that she might have. He then mentions that they are moving into a game of castles, and again, first time reading, I remember castles, just immediately thinking probably chess. He says the boys, and for no other reason than, I don't know, the fact that in the context he's like, we're going to be playing castles, that just feels like strategy. And then castles, I mean, I don't know, that just, I know like a couple of the chess pieces look like castles, so I don't know, that's just enough where I'm like, oh, he's probably talking about something like chess. So then it goes on, he talks about the boys' story is believable enough, but late at night when doubt starts to creep in, he is right to doubt just as he is right to go with Reimer to the mayor and convince him that Farson's glass was better with the witch, to be hidden with the witch, because he says gunslingers would, or he thinks to himself, gunslingers would never find it there, let alone a few stupid kids. So now he's seemingly kind of glad that they were able to go and hide the wizard's glass with Rhea, because now they've got affiliation people here, and he says that even gunslingers couldn't find that thing up there with the witch, let alone these stupid kids. Of course, Jonas needs to watch some Scooby-Doo episodes in my mind. I remember thinking that when, these guys are talking all this shit on kids. I'm like, it always just reminds me that, I would have gotten away with it. It wasn't for those meddling kids. Not speaking about like the story as it unfolds, but I just remember thinking that the first time where it's like, yeah, just keep doubting kids, man, that there's a whole show of Scooby-Doo that never works out well for them. Jonas begins to walk away, saying he did not want to kill the boys. Things were too delicate, or delicate enough without that being a thing. But he would like to give them a sore paw, so that they would think twice about tangling with the Big Coffin Hunters. He began up the stairs with a pronounced limp. It says that Court would recognize that limp, as Court was there when he saw when the blow happened that caused that limp. It had been done by Court's father with an ironwood club that broke Jonas's leg behind the Great Hall of Gilead before sending him west into exile. Eventually, he found a gun, as exiles always did, even in this world. Reynolds sat down and took over the game of at Coral's table as the sun was beginning to come up. So, wow, there's a lot there. First, the Coffin Hunters are influencing the movers and shakers of this town, enough so that where Roland and his company are going to end up staying is being decided right here by these hard case men in this, pretty nasty bar. The fact that, what did he say? We're going to go speak with Reimer, and then Reimer will talk to Avery, and then Avery will tell the boys to go stay here. So it's just really crazy that, like, these outsiders that have only been in this town for a month, they're hard case dudes, but they're basically leading on the top people of this town and dictating where Roland and his Tet are going to end up being placed to camp. I think that's an interesting dichotomy, because that if they hadn't already told us that they've only been there a month, my thought process would be these guys are deeply ingrained and maybe they're just the power behind the throne and they've been here for a long time. But only being here a month and already getting into that kind of power is pretty crazy. My next note, they're concerned about keeping the boys from the drop and the oil patch. Also, they're hiding oil tankers. That is very interesting. I definitely want to track that as I'm reading, because it's like, wait, the drop and the oil patch, those are the main things they want to keep the kids from. Reynolds asks about the oil tankers. So very, very interesting. Of course, oil tankers and oil patch probably go together. The drop, we don't know necessarily how that figures in. But yeah, very, very interesting. While the two younger Coffin Hunters shroud the tankers, Jonas is going to be at the party buttering up Cordelia for information and trying to get a read on Roland and his Tet. Again, that's very interesting, but also nerve-wracking for me, because, again, I already don't like Cordelia. She already seems like an antagonistic person to Susan's life. So now getting what is potentially looking like one of the more antagonistic people that might run into Roland and run across Roland and potentially be a danger to Roland and his friends is now going to smooth up with someone that we already are not a fan of, and I don't know, not liking the way this is all going. He mentions castles, and I already mentioned I immediately associate that with chess. We'll see how that pans out, though. And then the glass, the wizard's glass that Rhea has belongs to Farson. I don't remember if that mentioned that when Rhea was getting it. But if not, or even if it is mentioned, it's restating it here that it belongs to Farson. That gives us a clue as well. So apparently these men, I don't know. I mean, I guess Farson is the one that's against affiliation. We already know that for sure. But the fact that they're talking about the affiliation as though that's the opposition, and then they're also dictating where this property of Farson's is to be hidden here, it is all spelling out to be very, very bad news. Jonas wants to make the boys scared of the Coffin Hunters so that they will give them a wide berth. That'll be interesting to see how that works out. It's also interesting because, like, we know it's Roland, right? And Roland is actually a gunslinger now. These guys don't know that. These guys just know that they're affiliation children. And one of his thought processes almost immediately is, I would love to give them a sore paw. I want to get them to be scared of me. That's an interesting dichotomy for a hard case person to basically see a bunch of, Roland is a tiny bit older than the other two, but probably not much. So we're talking 13, 14-year-old kids. And his first thought process is, I want to hurt them so that they're scared of us. That's kind of brutal. I know this is a different world than our world, but that's yikes. Jesus Christ, man, they're children. But then my last thing here, Jonas is a failed gunslinger and Court's dad broke his leg and sent him west. What a cool bit of world building. But also, it adds to the idea mentioned earlier that the Coffin Hunters have plenty of gunslinger tricks. It also shows that Jonas is a very, very dangerous person. He, of course, failed his trial, but then again, we understand from the way it works with Roland that it wasn't just like a 6-week boot camp course, right? Like they were raised from a very young age by Court, and likely Jonas would have had the same nearly lifelong training before his trial of manhood, because again, Roland did it at 14, and Court told him, you're way too young. Your father's the youngest and you're younger than him by a year or two. So let's say Stephen Deshane was 16, and that was considered very young. So it's like, let's just say most of the people do it around 18 to 23, like that little window in there, I guess, would be my speculation of probably when a lot of people do their trial by man, or their trial for their guns. So that means that if they're from, Rugrats up until that point, that means that there's a good chance that Jonas will have had a good lifetime worth of training. And then he will have learned a lot in that. Even though he failed, he will know a shitload about being a gunslinger. And since Reynolds has been with him since he's age 15, he would have imparted a lot of that to him, certainly. And probably to a lesser extent to Pape, because I think we get the impression that Pape's a tiny bit younger, or at least has been with this group the shortest amount of time. So all that to say, these men are a hell of a lot more dangerous now than they were 3 paragraphs ago. A lot just got added to there, and again, that's nuts. That Court is a failed gunslinger. So that will move us over to Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is subtitled "Welcome to Town," and we are going to go through, I believe, 5 subchapters. I believe is what I have outlined for. So let's go ahead and dive into Chapter 5, again titled "Welcome to Town." So subchapter number 1: 2 nights after arriving, Roland and the rode their mounts beneath the arch that read "Come in peace." That was inscribed upon it. Somehow the torches in the courtyard were burning in different colors that made Roland think of fireworks. He could hear guitars and murmuring voices and laughter of women. The air smelled of what would, for the rest of his life, remind him of magus, sea salt, oil, and pine. Alan was freaking out, saying he can't do this. He said it then goes on to say he is not a very social person, and that he looked scared to death. Cuthbert looked to be handling it better, but Roland knew that he would have to be the one that would have to lead, because Cuthbert was probably a little bit more of a devil-may-care attitude, more so than actual confidence. Roland began to tell Alan that he would be fine, but Cuthbert cut him off, laughing, saying that he looked fine, white as a sheet and ugly as a. And then he is cut off by Roland telling him to shut up. Roland told him not to drink anything with alcohol, and that their cover story would give them cover to decline booze without being suspicious. He also said just be pleasant and smile, and then Alana, after all that pep talk, is feeling a lot more confident. So different color fire, a small detail but really cool image to put in your heads, and one that I can't wait to see on screen, because different colored fire, that's always a weird looking thing. Even when it's like a science teacher or a scientist that's doing like, oh well, here you burn this and then the flame turns blue. I'm always fascinated by that shit. I think it's cool as hell. Because we're so used to fire, so to see fire in a different color is always crazy. It's like seeing the sky being, someone CG in the sky to be green, right? Like we're so used to the blue sky that suddenly when it's different, it's just jarring. So my next note, I love that those smells would always remind Roland of Magus. I think that is pretty legit. There is something about smell that is just so fucking triggering to our memories, whether it's a pleasant thing or an unpleasant thing. It could be a pleasant smell that pulls you to a time or place in your past. There could be a perfume or cologne that reminds you of an ex-lover, or it could remind you of an old family member that you have, or an old friend. It can remind you of people you haven't seen in decades. In lifetimes worth of time, but we just immediately are drawn back with smells. For me, my grandpa did leather work, so like the smell of his leather shop and the smell of just like raw leather and stuff is one of those. Like, it'll bring me back immediately to my grandpa and working with leather. There's just all those kind of smells that just draw you in. There's certain colognes. I know there's like at least one perfume that I've smelt on people that'll trigger me back to an ex girlfriend from a long time ago that I probably haven't seen in 15 years, but it'll immediately bring me back to that all those years ago, because just smell is crazy. Feels like smell is way more potent and has a way greater ability to throw us into the past, more so than any of our other senses. I also love Alan freaking out. It is showing us his personality. He is anxious and not really good at social settings. Also, it's really cool to see Roland able to give him a pep talk a bit that actually works and kind of gives him some confidence, especially when they're all kids. Yes, Roland has won his guns, but he's still only 14 years old. So it's kind of cool to see that happening, even amidst kids. And I totally feel for Alan too. I think I can generally hold my own in social settings, but it is not my favorite. I'd rather, chill at home with a small group of people, or in a smaller setting. When I'm like a big old party with a lot of people, it is not my happy place. So not that I'd be freaking out like this, but the idea of not being a social butterfly, I feel you, Alan. I'm right there with you. Going on here, Cuthbert says the people may just won't have much in the way of social graces, and that will actually put the boys one step ahead. Roland nodded and then saw the rook skull mounted on the back of Cuthbert's saddle horn, and he commanded him to get rid of it. Cuthbert looked guilty and stashed the lookout in his saddlebag. A few men in white jackets were approaching and bowing and smiling. Roland whispered to his mates to keep their heads and to remember why they are here and remember the faces of their fathers. He then greets the hostlers, who welcome them to Mayor's house. So Bert pointing out that they are from a more refined place, and these would be more simple folks, is a great reminder to us readers of the cultural differences. Of course, we know that this world is different than our world, but even inside of this world, there's different stages of society, right? Like these boys coming from Gilead and the inner baronies, like that's going to look different than a little bit more of a seaport type town, or a fishing town that's way out off the beaten path. It's a good reminder that in this world that King is creating, there are different places that have much different lifestyles and cultural refinement. And then my last note for this, the lookout, I love it so much already. Of course Roland's getting mad about it, but I love it, and I love Cuthbert. He's awesome. So going over to subchapter 2, the High Sheriff welcomed them the day before, so I'm actually glad for this, because I remember I forgot to put a note for it, but in subchapter 1, when it started off by saying 2 nights after they arrived, I remember being like, wait, what? Like, Jonas was saying that like the next day they'd go meet the sheriff. Like, why the fuck are we jumping over that and going to the second night where they're having this welcome dinner? So with subchapter 2 jumping back to that previous day, I was pretty relieved about, because it just felt like, man, even if there's not a lot to show there, just show me something. Like, you can't set it up for me with Jonas talking about it and then not show it to me. Like, that seems weird. So again, so that's where we're at. The High Sheriff welcomed them the day before, as happy as the hostlers, and as much as anyone that they encountered. It made Roland suspicious and on guard. Of course, the friendly nature of the people is one of the main reasons that they were sent here, but it still put him on guard nevertheless. The sheriff's office and jail had an amazing view of the boathouses and docks right below, with men and boys line fishing while women mended nets and sails. Herc Avery was a big-bellied man in his sheriff's clothes and must have been spying on them through the peephole, because the door flung open before Roland could reach out and ring the bell. He bowed so deeply to them that Cuthbert was afraid that he would overbalance and roll down the stairs and into the harbor. He smiled. Avery's smile was so wide it seemed it might split his head in half. 3 deputies that looked like farmers crowded the door behind the sheriff. And Avery shook their hands, each of the boys' hands, while bowing. They then went inside the cool office that often came with brick buildings, even on a warm day. There was a desk in the center of the room with a roll top desk with some ever rare paper in it. There was also some ancient looking blunderbusses that Roland wondered if there was any ammunition for, or even if there was, would they ever be able to fire. There was also jail cells, 3 on each side of the corridor. Roland smelled soap, and he realized that they had cleaned for their coming. He thought that might not be too strange, since they are from New Canaan, and might seem like, and it might appear as royalty to these men that are so far off the beaten path in this small corner of the world. Avery introduced his deputies. Roland shook their hands, but not really giving much time to memorizing their names, as he knew that was Cuthbert's job, and Cuthbert rarely dropped a name that someone gave him. The third man, thin with a monocle, dropped to a knee before them. Avery scolded him for doing so, and said that he is embarrassing them. That the man was embarrassing the boys. So we jump back to the previous day when we met Avery. Again, very glad, because I was a little bit mad that King was jumping around like that, jumping so far in advance and letting us miss this. So much friendliness and smiling and bowing. I'm starting to get suspicious myself. There's just an element where it's overboard. And I will say I'm like half and half on this reading it the first time, because like, okay, so Roland is literally being sent here because it's safe. So in my mind, like, you're here to like be hidden from Martin, right? And so it was picked to be safe. So in my mind, like, this should be a safe place. And of course, Roland is a child. His imagination is going to run wild. He's going to imagine everyone's out to get them and like be suspicious of people. So there's part of me that's like, all right, Roland, are you just being a little bit too suspicious? But then like all the friendliness and bowing, it's starting to strike me as maybe it's a little bit overboard, and maybe Roland's on to something. I know we've seen some of it exposed with the Jonas stuff, but there's always an element of like kind of wandering back and forth with Roland, because again, this isn't Roland that we've known all the previous books. This is a child Roland that barely won his guns. So I don't know. It's an interesting back and forth, but yeah, there's a lot of friendliness, and I could see the suspicion there, even if you try to remove from your mind what we already know that's been revealed to us, and maybe just think, oh, Roland, you're overreacting. But no, it's starting to seem suspicious. Roland noticing that they cleaned for them. Is this just pride in your workplace, or are they trying to hide something? There's any number of things that could portend from the sheriff and his deputies. I love the phrase that Cuthbert rarely drops names. Sadly, I am the opposite. I drop names like greased up bearings, because I am not great with names when I'm being introduced to people. Sometimes I'm just so like in the fluster of meeting someone that I'll end up realizing, like, shit, I didn't catch their name. I freaking completely missed it. So I am the opposite of Cuthbert in that regard when it comes to name catching. Roland said that they're going on to the next little section here. Roland said they are not anything special, and Avery laughed and said that they were from Inworld, 500 miles away, and the first affiliation that this corner of the world had seen since a gunslinger came through 4 years earlier. He then offers them a drink and stumbles over himself a bit about their ages, because he was offering Graf. And then he, kind of as he's stumbling through the aspect of their age, he then offers white tea as opposed to Graf. They accept the tea. Avery says that that he can hear the in-world in their voices, he can see it in their faces, but they hold to the old ways here, and he apologizes. But he says that he does need to see their papers, and he doesn't want to hold them up for long. Roland produces them, and Avery took a while with the papers, and Roland thinks to himself, man, for a guy that says he doesn't want to hold us up, he's taking an inordinate amount of time just studying every aspect of the command that he has, that he gives to him there. Then it mentions that the linen count was so high on the quote unquote paper that it was closer to cloth than paper. And then I also wanted to point out part of the paper that he's doing here. It says Will Dearborn, drover's son, Richard Stockworth, rancher's son, and Arthur Heath, stockline breeder's son. So kind of gives us the fake jobs of their fathers for the fake names they're given here. So also with the I didn't have a note for it once we get done here, but I wanted to point out the linen count thing. for me, that always reminds me of like dollar bills. Like the reason dollar bills have the feel they have is because they're paper, but they do have a little bit more linen mixed in, and that's why dollar bills feel like dollar bills. And they don't just feel like paper. So that's kind of what I think of now is kind of cash feeling paper for the. Although it does say it's almost closer to linen than paper, so maybe it's even more linen-y than even money is. And I'm talking American dollars. I actually don't necessarily know what I haven't had. I don't think I've ever held any foreign currency that I know of. Maybe actually, I think a Canadian dollar. Somebody gave me one once as like a whatever. And actually, someone I take it back. One other one. Somebody gave me some of their currency from Trinidad. A friend I met at a Star Wars celebration that I met online. Then we met at celebration, and he gave me some of that. So outside of that, I don't know what most of the world's currency is like, but I would assume it's not just like flat paper. I'm assuming there's like some elements to it, like the U.S. dollar, that gives it makes it a little bit harder to counterfeit. Tangent aside, it goes on. The papers were given back to them, and Roland then took out a letter and handed it to Avery, who was starstruck as he marveled that a gunslinger had signed this. Cuthbert agreed with some mocking humor, including a Magus accent, and he says, I think he said, "Aye, so it is." And Roland kicks his ankle hard without taking his eyes off Avery at all. It was from Stephen Deshane of Gilead, gunslinger, meaning knight, squire, peacemaker, and baron. Then it does say, though, despite all of the rantings of Farson, that last title, baron, was not much of a reality in this day and age. And then it goes on and says, the 29th generation descended from Arthur Eld, addressed to Thorin, Reimer, and Avery. I typoed and put timer instead of Reimer, but that is Reimer. And it goes on and sent greetings and recommended their notice to notice the boys delivering this. They had been spent on a special mission from the affiliation to serve as counters of materials that might be of use in the affiliation in a time of need. It mentions the word war was nowhere on the document, but it was screamed from between every line. Stephen exhorted the men to afford these boys every service in counting, and they would be here for at least 3 months, but as long as a year. It closed by inviting anyone to write back to them to report on the boys' behavior. So definitely interesting. Because in my mind, I try to think of this from Avery's perspective here. So you've got a gunslinger that is saying he is literally a descendant of Arthur Eld, so not just your average walking, gunslinger, but you're talking about one that is got that royal blood in him. These are kids that only one of the three are being said that they're from. We got that when Roland was talking to Susan. He says he was from whatever. Alan was from another place, and then only Cuthbert's fake character was supposed to be from Gilead. So I would wonder what it looks like from Avery's perspective, that these kids from various inner barony towns that did some helling, and then are being sent here. But then you've got like a very prestigious gunslinger of Gilead sending a note to kind of cover them. Like not saying that it's like a thing that would expose Roland's identity, but it was just a thing like maybe that's the norm that you'd have. Like again, if these gunslingers are like kind of like dignitaries and knights and squires and peacemakers, if they're these large things as well, maybe he's doing it from the perspective of being like a judge, where it's like, this bad shit's happened, we gotta get these kids to pay their dues and make their names right again in the sight of society, and maybe it's something like that. I don't know. It's just a very interesting thing to think about, is that as far as he knows, there's no connection to this man Stephen Deshane. So it's interesting that he's the one writing it. And I also love that he's kind of gaga over the fact that it's a gunslinger that signed that. Shows how gunslingers are viewed in the world. We've obviously seen that in the quote-unquote present when Roland, through the first 3 books, that Roland is very, a lot of people are saying gunslingers don't exist anymore. Gilead's been gone for a long time. Roland says, I'm the last. But now we're rewinding into the past here, and we're now in a time that gunslingers are a little bit more present. But it seems like they're still not very present, because in the off-beaten path, like here, 1, there hasn't been a gunslinger here in 4 years, and 2, he's kind of gaga about the fact that a gunslinger signed this note. So kind of gives us an idea of how gunslingers are viewed, at least in this part of the world. Let's see. Roland is playing it humble, but Avery is not buying it. This is my notes here. I think we tend to see similar things, similar ways of responding in our world. It varies on who and how they're treated, but this idea isn't alien to us. Whether it be something like, oh, someone's from, like for instance, sometimes like you'll get like a politician that's at a federal level, call it a House of Representatives member or a senator or something, that will come to the place that they're representing, and I feel like people just kind of get gaga because it's like, oh my God, you're like so and so that's like on the news sometimes, but you also work in Washington. Like I think we kind of get these ideas of like, you know, we have some reverence. You know, it could be for celebrities as well. Here in Utah, this time of year is Sundance, so it's like you've got, you know, like Pedro Pascal was just up in Park City because he has a movie debuting, you know, and then people just act in a certain way. And obviously here it's being acted that way because these kids are from the inner baronies, but it's like I don't think that idea of, you know, and sometimes you see it with like foreigners, you know, I've seen it sometimes, or I've heard about it where, you know, somebody will come from, you know, America to another country, or somebody will come from another country to America, and people just treat them a certain way because like, oh shit, you're from like England, or you know, wherever, just, or you're from America. Like the way of responding, I guess, is just, it's not a unique thing to this world. It feels familiar to me, even if I'm not necessarily doing the best job at explaining what I, you know, giving good examples of it. So then my next note, a gunslinger 4 years ago is the last affiliation presence here. No wonder shit is afoot here. Absent leadership is something that can honestly earn resentment, as well as the feeling of being neglected, can get people thinking about some crazy shit. So the fact that it's been so rare, it kind of reminds me of the Jedi in like the prequel trilogy of Star Wars. You know, you get this sense that Jedi are not, there's not that many Jedi. There's only, you know, maybe, you know, I would say thousands, not like tens of thousands, but maybe thousands covering the entire galaxy. So there's like people that go their whole lives, cities that go their whole lives without ever seeing a Jedi. And I think that, that's kind of what it's feeling like here. There's probably not as many gunslingers as there probably was 1,000 years ago. So I think that it is a little bit more rare, and I think it's going to be more common, let's say Lud, if things haven't fallen yet. A big town like Lud's probably sees gunslingers more often than tiny little mages here on the edge of the sea. Okay, so the letter from Stephen is pretty cool. Also, they had a picture of Arthur Eld, so Stephen being a descendant from him would be a huge thing for these people, I think. Again, since we mentioned earlier, there is some reverence to the older stories, and Arthur Eld is being somewhat revered still. So the fact that he's able, even though Stephen is from and I realized I also misspelled Stephen. I spelled it like Stephen King and not Stephen DeShane. But even if Stephen comes from a gilly of a Jilly or whatever of Arthur Eld, not necessarily his wife, you know, that he had many bastard children that still hold pride in this time to being a descendant of Arthur Eld, even if it is from a whore or you know, whatever, not a person that isn't his wife. I don't mean to say whore as like a derisive way, but that's how they would describe it in this universe. So the idea that this person is descendant of Arthur Eld is something that I think people might be a little bit gaga about as well. Of course, Avery was a little bit gaga just because it was a gunslinger, but I do wonder if there would be a shift in his mind when he realized that Stephen's saying, I'm a descendant of Arthur Eld. That's something I would imagine that maybe you would see the actor play it a certain way in the Flanagan Dark Tower series, which of course is coming. It's got to be coming, right? Positive thinking. But I think that you have the actor play a certain way where it's got, you know, maybe he's gaga about the fact that it's signed by a gunslinger, but then when he reads that it's, you know, Stephen 29th descendant of Arthur Eld, like maybe the actor goes that much more like reverent or whatever. I don't know. It feels like he could play that in a cool way that King doesn't necessarily spell out here in the text. I love Cuthbert and Roland's, and I love Cuthbert. He just cracks me up. And then Roland's ability to kick him without looking is brilliant. It tells me that this is not a new thing, that Roland has probably often kicked Cuthbert under tables for breaking decorum and stuff. So and the fact that he's able to aim and hit that ankle without even turning his head is just wonderfully telling. I can't wait to see that on screen. That just sounds so funny. It makes me laugh reading it. I can only imagine what it actually would look like. Yeah, My last note before we move on to the next chunk of text here. So interestingly, at the minimum, the timeline for the boys match that of the Big Coffin Hunters in this area. So the Big Coffin Hunters have been here a month. It says they're going to be here for another 3 months. And then we also now see Stephen Deshane saying they're going to be here 3 months, if not a year. So at the low end, these kids are going to basically be recalled back to where they came from. At the same time, the Big Coffin Hunters are leaving, which also jives with what Susan was being told. I believe it lines right up with the Reap Festival and the bonfire that she has to wait until betting with Mayor Thorin. So there's a lot of interesting timelines all converging at one point. And as a person that generally analyzes like different things story wise, and I'm talking even as a first time reader, I always have like friends, Peter, Hayden, you guys have heard about these, Peter, but you guys have heard about Hayden. He's been in the chat a few times. Every once in a while they'll just like look at me like in wonderment about like in a movie where I'll like call something or whatever, and it's just because a lot of times I just look at like kind of the structure of like story, and I just am able to sometimes just like engineer it in my head and predict things that kind of surprises people at times. And it's kind of the same thing here. Is it's very interesting to me that 3 major aspects all seem to be converging at the exact same time. It makes me wonder, is that on purpose, and is that 3-month window going to be the realm of this story, and is something big going to happen at the time of that bonfire? Is that going to be kind of I don't know, just the way it's kind of like Chekhov's gun a little bit. It just feels like, okay, you got 3 major timeline things all converge at the same time. That feels like that's got to be intentional, and there's got to be something going there. We'll see. So then going on, the one with the monocle came back with a tray of tea and presented it like a butler. They each took a cup, and Alan jiggled the glass subtly, cluing Roland into the fact that the tea had ice in it. Roland understands. Ice in high summer is strange. Alan complimented the tea, and Avery says the man's wife made it. Avery asks if they are curious about the ice. He then says that they would not expect something so nice in such a backwater place as this. Roland realizes under all of this that Avery does not like them. He could just sense it. Alan says it's not just Hambry, but ice is rare everywhere, even in the in-world. They then mention there's only a few special occasions throughout the year that ice will get brought out. And Cuthbert even mentions that, one of them he calls out and says that literally outside of fireworks, ice is their favorite thing about that holiday. So it's rare even there. I think they're trying to like, no, we're not saying like you guys are backwater, you don't know what the fuck ice is, but it's even special where we come from. So it just feels like trying to not cause an incident here. Avery says that they still have a working gas fridge and a stove in the town gathering hall. And there's plenty of earth gas at the oil patch that they pass on their way in. He says the stove is a curiosity, but the fridge is useful. Roland asks about generators, and Avery says they have 4 or 5, and the biggest one is at Francis Lengel's Rocking Bee Ranch. And he says it says Honda on it. Roland says that he has actually seen Honda once or twice, usually on motor-driven bikes. Avery says that they can't run the generators much because most of the oil patch is oil and not gas, and they can't refine it. Avery apologizes for the mayor not being able to be here. He says he is very busy, but he will do a dinner party the next night to welcome them to the town formally. Cuthbert says they do not have any fancy dress as they have ridden far, which disarms Avery a bit because it makes the boys seem unsophisticated. He tells them that it's not necessary. He says, wear the nicest thing you have and it'll work. Nobody's going to be wearing sashes at this event. That's not the kind of town this is. Avery says that they will likely end up working more than playing anyway because Thorin is inviting all of the big ranchers, stockliners, and livestock owners from the barony. Roland thanks them all and tells Dave to thank his wife for the tea. Avery tells them where he tells them where they'll be staying at the ranch that, again, Jonas is the one that picked out, which is, again, very interesting. So it all worked out. Jonas wasn't just like speculating like, hey, we should tell them this and see if it works out. No, he knew full well he was going to give that whole telephone game. And then here we are seeing Avery actually following through with basically the orders of Elder Jonas that's only been in this town for a month. Again, it's very, very interesting to see because you would think the big movers and shakers of this town would have a little bit more weight in this whole town than some outsiders that have only been here a month. But there's something going on here because they got some leverage and some sway on things. The talk of ice is interesting because we at least me, take ice for granted. At least in America, I know that some places in the world, ice is not very normal in drinks. Not that they can't have it, but I know I've heard that with like people that travel internationally a lot, where they'll go and they'll get a soda and they'll be kind of surprised as Americans that the soda doesn't have ice in it, and it's not necessarily normal in every country. But I just think that even if you don't have it as a normal thing in your like sodas, for instance, I think we all have easy access to ice. So I think it's an interesting thing that kind of grounds us in this world that, yeah, this is a world that's mostly moved on, and you know, there is an easy, like every house doesn't have a refrigerator, you know, they've got one working fridge in this entire town that's gas powered. So, and then even, you know, them trying to like kind of get these guys not to be like feel like they're trying to play holier than thou, they basically say no, it's rare in our world too. So, you know, I don't think they're lying. So even in the Inner Baronies and Gilead, ice is a rarity. So that's interesting. Some talk of earth gas, which I probably assume is natural gas, because he talks about oil that can't be refined, but then he says that the fridge works off of earth gas. I'm assuming that's going to be some kind of natural gas that doesn't take refinement, since it works, because it feels like in like very short period of time he talks about, oh, we use natural gas from the oil patch, and then on the, like not even 15 seconds later he's saying, well, we got generators but can't use them because we can't refine the oil from the oil patch. So I feel like that's one that could be easy to figure, or to wonder what the fuck's he doing. He's talking about both ends of his mouth here. But I think the fact that he says earth gas makes me think that it is probably something, not oil. It would probably be the equivalent of what we have with like natural gas. And then my last note here, a very interesting game being played by both sides here, it seems. I feel like reading it, you can just feel the underlying tension as both sides are hiding things from each other, and both are trying to size each other up, and I don't think that either of them necessarily like, you know, Roland and his friends don't really like these people don't like them. I just feel like this is this is going to be a fun scene to watch on screen, because I think that you'll just feel that underlying tension, and if it's acted well, I think you'll just totally feel exactly what they're going for here. All right, so moving on to subchapter 3 now. It's starting off here. As soon as the boys turn the corner, Avery and the deputies stopped waving, which is very telltale. When you have, you know, people, you know, pretending to wave to someone being friendly, and then as soon as they're out of view, they, like, you know, I just see like the smile drop and the hand drops. That's how I picture. I feel like Gus Fring did that a few times in Breaking Bad. Avery asks Dave what he thinks, and Dave surmises that they are soft as an egg just dropped from a chicken's ass. Avery says that mayhap, but the one with the flat cap that did most of the talking doesn't think that he is soft. So they're saying he's soft, but Avery is saying that Roland at least doesn't believe that he is soft. Dave says it doesn't matter what he thinks, that they're just rich boys from the inner world, and maybe they'll have to start thinking the way that, you know, the way everyone else, the way these people are thinking, not their own way of thinking. And then it goes on and says they would leave the rich boys alone if they left them alone. And that was the word from Mayor's house. So it sounds like the orders from on high is leave these kids alone. But Avery admitted to himself that he would not mind dusting up with them. He would enjoy putting his foot in the balls of the one with the stupid bird skull on his saddle, who he thought was too stupid, or who he thought was too stupid to see his condescension. So he's basically looking at Cuthbert saying, that dumb motherfucker with the bird skull on his thing, the one that thinks I'm too stupid to see that he's being condescending to me. So it's funny. We're only half a chapter, or, you know, a few pages removed from Elder Jonas saying like, I don't know anything about these kids that just rode into town, but I would love to, you know, hurt their paw and, you know, kick their asses a little bit so they respect us. And then now here we have Avery. Of course, he actually knows a little bit more about them, and he's actually met them, but he's still saying the same thing. He would love to have a dust up with them, and he wants to put his foot in the balls of Cuthbert, basically. So we now have two groups of adults at varying levels of understanding of who these kids are that want to beat up these children. So yikes. So my notes here, this is a short subchapter. We're getting close up on it here. We've got subchapters 3, 4, and 5 left, but they're a little bit shorter than those last. We had a couple that we've already covered that were a lot longer. So the masks drop as soon as the boys are out of sight, and they're sized up by these men. It's just interesting to see. Again, I could just picture it in my mind. I think there is a Gus Fring time where he's like smiling and being like the chicken man, and then like it just drops when the person isn't looking anymore, and you just see like the killer gust ring that is whatever. And I just picture the same thing here. And then seeing them size them up is very interesting. Also, I had to note Avery does not like the lookout on Cuthbert's saddle. Of course, we saw Roland yell at him about the saddle, about the bird skull on the saddle, but that would be the next day while they're going to the mayor's banquet dinner thing. This would have been the day before, so Cuthbert would have been riding around openly with that bird skull on his saddle, which, of course, Roland is treating it like it's a stupid thing. He hid it earlier when they were at the camp, the last episode we had last year, and, obviously, Avery is not too happy about it as well. He is quite angered by it. So, subchapter 4, the boys rode single file until they were beyond the Traveler's Rest, where they saw a young boy that was obviously mentally challenged, and he was scrubbing the brick stoop. He looked up and waved to them, and they waved back. They then got out of single file. Roland ended up in the middle. Roland asks what they thought of the sheriff. Cuthbert said that he had no opinion because opinions were politics and politics were evil, which has caused many to be hung while they were still young and pretty, which is hilarious. It's one of my favorite little like tiny lines that you would never like overtly remember from Cuthbert, but it's a very clever one. He then leans forward and taps the lookout and says the lookout did not care for him much and thinks that he is a big fat bag of guts without a trustworthy bone in his body. Roland asks Alan, who considered it for a long time, and then finally said that if Avery came upon the boys burning in the street, he would not piss on them to put them out. That made Cuthbert laugh and asked Roland what he thinks. And Roland says he doesn't interest him. Basically, Roland says he doesn't interest me much, but one thing he said does. The drop was 30 wheels long and 5 wide, basically. So how does he know? Because I did forget to highlight that, because when they are talking about, hey, go stay at this place, Roland says, oh, we didn't know where to go, so we just camped on wherever on this little like clearing area. He's like, yeah, it's called the drop. And then he ends up telling him like, hey, it's so and so's property. He wouldn't mind. He would understand that you guys didn't know that you were on his property necessarily. So now Roland's pointing out that, hey, this drop thing is fucking huge. How the hell did he know where we were staying? Whose plot of land on the drop we were staying on? They both looked at him with surprise and speculation. Cuthbert leaned forward and tapped the lookout and said that they were being watched, and he never reported it. And he said no supper for him tonight, and it would be the stockade for him next time. Roland's thoughts shifted from Avery to Susan, whom he would see the next night, and wondered if her hair would be down, and he could not wait to find out. So, a return to the idea of Roland and Susan here. We had quite a bit of it from Susan's side, but Roland here, we just had this entire scene where he has not once talked or thought about Susan, but at the very end, of course, he does. So we see the boy that Jonas thought about. Jonas thought him as the soft-headed boy that works at the Traveler's Rest. We've now seen him. We also know that from Jonas's internal monologue or internal thought process that this boy is the one that is chased out with jeers and flying glasses of beer every night. Is this little boy, or is this not little boy, but this boy is mentally challenged. He's out there scrubbing. He waves to the gun to Roland and his Tet, and they wave back, which is awesome. They're at least treating him better, seemingly, than some of these people in the town. Also, I love Cuthbert so much. He makes me laugh every single time. He's just great. Again, that line, opinions are politics, and politics are dangerous. Politics are a way for a young man to be, or a person to be hung when they're still young and pretty, which, of course, he being like a 13-year-old would fit that probably pretty well. So he's probably talking about himself there. But makes me laugh. Roland sussed out that they've been spied upon. That's awesome. I love seeing that because, again, we know who Roland is as an adult, but now as a kid, I think we really got to track, like, how capable is Roland? Yes, he surprised court by using David the Hawk instead of, like, a traditional weapon. He did win his guns way earlier than anyone else. His father was the youngest ever, and he was younger than his father by a couple years. We know that, but still, we still cannot assume that the Roland that we're dealing with here has anywhere near the same capabilities that Roland has has had up to this point that we've read as Roland as an adult. So I'm glad to see Roland sussing that out and catching that. I will admit the first time reading it through, I didn't catch that. I mean, I guess we didn't necessarily have the same information to know that the drop was that big. I don't think I pictured the drop that big until that line from Roland. So I guess there was maybe not, it wouldn't be as easy for me to suss out as it was for Roland, but he did indeed suss it out, which is awesome. Roland doing a good job in his detective work as a little gumshoe. Then my last one here, before we move to chapter 5. Then Roland thought about Susan again, not believing that this was... so Roland thinking about Susan again really caused me to completely not believe that this was a momentary meeting at this point in the story. These two have thought and spoken about that moment so much that it's like, okay, that was way too big. Because I didn't know if it would just be like, I guess we had the pretext of like the different times Roland's ravings that kind of give us some hints that it's probably a big thing. But still, we ultimately didn't know, and I kind of wondered, like, is this going to be like a weird, whatever. But this, like, the fact that we're continually returning to that meeting on both sides so often, and it's weighing on both of their minds and stuff, makes me think, like, in my head as a first-time reader, I remember thinking like Romeo and Juliet, not necessarily in like I don't know, tragic ending potentially, but like it just made me kind of wonder if, like, yes, this is going to be like kind of the forbidden love full-on thing. So again, not that that's like this big revelation, because there's been plenty of hints dropped all the way back as far as book 1. If you have the rewritten version from 2003, there's some references to the girl in the window, and so and tragedy being attached to that. So it's not necessarily like it's the fucking big eureka moment, but it's just kind of one of those things that I remember at this point thinking like, okay, this Susan aspect is going to be a lot bigger part of the story than maybe I was anticipating. Okay, so moving on to subchapter 5. This is the last subchapter, and then I do have a couple small things to discuss in the spoiler section. Don't worry, I'm not there yet, so let's cover subchapter 5, and then we'll hit the spoiler alert siren. So subchapter 5. So now we're back with them, the Roland and his buddies here at Mayor's house. So we're fast forwarded back to the day after the second day. Roland thinks to himself that let the games begin, but he ultimately does not know exactly what he meant by that. He certainly doesn't think castles, at least not yet. The hostlers lead their mounts away, and they stood together. The three stood together, and Cuthbert asked if they knock or just let themselves in. Roland didn't have to answer as the door opened as two women stepped out, both wearing long white collared dresses. The plumper woman bowed, greeted them. They bowed and thanked her in an unintended chorus. She laughed and introduced herself as Olive Thorin, the mayor's wife, and the thinner woman next to her was her sister-in-law, Coral, which we've already heard a little bit about Coral Thorin. She's the half-owner and sometimes frequenter of the Traveler's Rest. Coral smiled with a smile that never once touched her eyes and curtsied. The boys bowed again. I don't think I took a note on this, but I love the idea of a smile that doesn't touch someone's eyes. I feel like some people I've even heard complain about lines like that because they're like, what does that even mean? But I feel like all you need to see is like a really, really good actor that's playing like a psychopath, whether it be like a Zac Efron playing Ted Bundy or whatever. But you always get this like dead-eyed stare, and sometimes they'll like smile along with it. But there's this just dead-eyed stare where it's just like there is absolutely no emotion. Like from the smile here up to the eyes, there's just a massive disconnect, and the eyes just look dead as fuck. I mean, Hannibal Lecter does it as well. There are times that Hannibal comes off very charming. I think that's the brilliance of Hannibal Lecter as a character. But there are also times where he'll kind of smile and act like he's looking nice, but you could see in his eyes, the way Anthony Hopkins plays the eyes, that it just is absolutely fucking disconnected, where it's like he may be like saying something nice, but the eyes are saying, I want to eat your fucking face. And I love that. I think it's one of the more creepy things, and you don't see it super often, but every time you see it, I think it absolutely gives you the willies, because it's very strange, because like you're so used to a smile kind of carrying up into the eyes and like the whole face lights up, right? But when you got this weird disconnect and it's like two faces exist, the upper face with the eyes and the lower face of the mouth, and they're just doing two separate things, like it's very disconcerting. Olive welcomed them to Seafront and then offered for them to come in to their house with joy. Roland said he greeted her. Her greeting has made them joyful. He shook her hand, and then without thinking about it, he kissed it. Her delighted laughter made him smile. He liked Olive on sight, and with the problematic exception of Susan Delgado, Olive was the only one he met that night that he liked or trusted. So it feels very classic Stephen King. That is the end of the subchapter. That just feels kind of like the classic Stephen King, and that's the last time they ever saw each other. Where King kind of like spoils something, because we don't necessarily see this whole evening yet. We're going to cover that in the next episode. But here King's telling us up front that basically Olive and Susan, but he does say Susan's a problematic exception. But Olive, he says the only one outside of the problematic exception is Susan, is the only one they met that night that they liked or trusted. So it kind of gives us a hint that as we move forward and read into the next sections, which will be the next book club, we're going to be running into a lot of unlikable and untrustworthy characters. So my notes here, time jump back to the quote present, at least insofar as we are in the larger flashback, because we were just in a flashback within a flashback. Yes, only 2 layers there. It's Inception level, so I need an Inception button on my soundboard here to do the blom. Yeah, because which obviously is classic, because that was the first book of the Dark Tower series, is the Gunslinger, which did like the flashback within a flashback within a flashback. I think there's 3 levels of flashbacks there, so it's very it's becoming a pattern in this series where we're getting flashbacks and then flashbacks and flashbacks sometimes. So it's cool to see another one. Roland does not think he is playing castles, but it is what we earlier heard Jonas viewing it as. So Roland thinks let's let the games begin, but he doesn't think castles, at least not yet. But Jonas is thinking it that way. Again, puts us in a spot where we realize Roland in his headspace is in a different place than Jonas in his headspace. Of course, Jonas knows a lot more about what's going on than Roland does, or more than we do even. So I love the awkwardness of not knowing whether to knock or just go in. As a kid, I always struggled with that, with like families' houses and stuff, whether it be the holidays or Super Bowl parties or just any kind of things. I always remember being a young kid just never knowing, like, when do I have to knock and when can I just let myself in? Like, of course, there was like my one grandma's house I always felt the most comfortable, where I was like, I just walk right in. That's felt like second home. But the other grandmas, like, it was like 50-50. There's times I felt weird about walking in, and other times like I would like knock. Other times I just walk in. It was just as a kid, I always remember that being a thing that, like, I don't know. Just it has bothered me. So Cuthbert asking that makes me smile, because it reminds me of my childhood. Like where do you knock, where do you not knock, where can you just let yourself in, where do you not do that? So Olive is immediately likable by Roland, and probably by us as readers. It's also kind of heartbreaking because we already kind of know what's happening, because we've heard it, that Olive is basically being replaced by Susan in Mayor Thorin's bed. So it kind of sucks that we meet Olive and she's a very nice and likable person, because not that anyone deserves what she's going through, but it almost makes it worse when it's someone that's kind of nice and likable. I remember the first time reading this through, seeing the trouble here right away. Roland likes Olive here, and with the situation with Roland's mother, he is probably not going to be very happy when he learns that Susan is quote-unquote taking this man's husband. Obviously, it's not the exact same. It's not a woman swapping places in Roland's experience with his parents, but it's his mom, sleeping with Martin instead of his father. So, but it's a very, very similar thing. It's a very, very fresh wound for Roland. So I remember thinking like, oh God, this isn't going to be good. Just because, and then he's liking Olive. So again, he's going to be able to put some element of love into Olive. Then when he sees this, I don't think it's going to go well. I just remember thinking that, where it's like, this isn't going to be good. Let's see. It'd almost be better again if we didn't like her, and if Roland didn't like her. If it was Cordelia, that's very unlikable so far. I think you could at least try to like make peace with the fact that she's kind of getting fucked over. But unfortunately, no. Olive is so far a very sweet and jovial person. So my last note here, interesting thing for King to say that Olive and Susan, though she is problematic, and we are not sure exactly what that means, are the only people that Roland met that night. That he liked or trusted, letting us know that this town is full of people that he dislikes or distrusts. So we've already seen it with the sheriff and his men, but it sounds like we're in for a whole lot more when we come back next time and cover what happens as they go into this party and apparently meet a bunch of dislikable or unlikable and distrustworthy people. Let's see. So that is it for my notes there. So let me... there we go. I've lost my goddamn button. I think I moved my buttons around to try to clean things up, and suddenly it wasn't exactly where I'm used to it being. So let's go ahead and hit the spoiler warning.
Warning, spoilers ahead. Warning, spoilers ahead. Warning, spoilers ahead.
Okay. So that is the spoiler warning. We're now moving into the spoiler section. If you've not finished the 7 primary books of the Dark Tower series, this is the point where you want to probably turn the episode off. When you do finish reading, if you want to come back and listen to this little tail end section, that's totally fine. But now we're going to talk about the section we just covered in the context of the larger story and including some spoilers. So if you have not read finished the entire series, this is where it is no longer safe for you to listen. So now spoiler section is beginning. See you later if you haven't finished it. Please don't continue listening. If you do, it is more your fault than mine. So my first spoiler note section here, in the masturbation scene with Susan, it says, quote, she burned in her bed like a torch. I am not sure I've actually ever caught that until now. That's why I love doing these book clubs, because when I get really into the nitty gritty, there's just small things like that I would just breeze right by. But when we're in doing these a little bit more in depth, diving and analyzing it at the granular level, I think there's stuff that just jumps out at me that, even though I've probably read this series a dozen times, that these small little things that just slip by me. I never caught this before, but I assume this might be foreshadowing of the end. But it's always hard to tell with King, because he's always talks about how he writes without knowing how it'll end. So I don't know. I just feel like it's always very weird with King, because I think sometimes he kind of has a rough idea of where the story's going to go and where it might end, but other times he has no fucking clue and he just writes one page at a time, and when the end comes, it comes. And I don't know, maybe he even just wrote the whole way out and then came back through and added stuff in like this for context, or maybe it's a complete coincidence. I have no idea. But then again, I guess with all the mentions of her in previous books, it is alluded to that there's probably a tragedy involved here, and that Susan's probably not going to have the best time through this story. So it's not like we didn't know that she isn't going to die, but he as a writer didn't know that she was going to die. But I wonder if he knew how she was going to die at the end, at this point of writing that line. Because also there's been a couple mentions of the Reap bonfire a few times. So, and again, I don't know if that's just like Chekhov's gun setting that up, and that idea. Of course, we don't know yet that they burn the stuffy guys and stuff on the bonfire. We've heard about the Reap bonfire at least a half a dozen times so far, and so I'm just like, okay, so he's mentioned that bonfire a bunch of times, and now he's talking about she burned in her bed like a torch. Kind of makes me wonder if King, even if he didn't know the entirety of it all, I wonder if he kind of knew going in that would be her end, and this is like him dropping some foreshadowing in, which is sad. And then my next note here, so many of the clues of exactly what is going on here are here from the earliest stages. Jonas being worried about the drop, the oil patch, Reynolds talking about the tankers, just so much of what we're going to end up finding out about the actual caper that they're involved with here. The fact that they said they were in the acquisition trade, the fact that they have Farson's glass ball, Wizard's glass, they have they're talking about the affiliation like they're an enemy, like all of and I wouldn't say all the pieces, so many of the pieces of what we're going to end up finding out that they're basically here they're stealing a bunch of horses. They're going to underreport how many horses they have to give over to Farson, and then they're going to take oil to then power up tanks and use tanks against a bunch of horse riding folks on the affiliation side and massacre them. There's like a whole element going on here. And then of course the Wizard's glass that they're basically hiding here. There's a whole bunch that's going on, but if it's crazy how many hints are being dropped so early in the story. It kind of makes me wonder if King kind of had the idea of the rough elements of this story worked out from the very beginning, because there's a lot of foreshadowing involved, and it's pretty cool to see. And also just setup, like we're not even as a first time reader, I wonder if you could probably piece at least some of the elements of what's going on together. Then my last one here, also a lot of setup for Shimi, both the general both the general look of each of his knights at the rest, and the fact that he's chased out, people jeering at him and throwing shit at him every single night, which is sad, because especially as a full-time reader that's read everything, we could talk a little bit more openly about how much we all love Shimi and adore Shimi, and just how sad it is to think about him being treated so goddamn poorly by these fucking goddamn wicked motherfuckers. So we see, and so seeing him then also wave to Roland and the Tet, and then getting a return wave from Roland and his Tet, that's really awesome, because I think it also foreshadows in a big way the fact that they're actually going to treat him very well. Like they don't necessarily just look down upon him or overlook him like other people do, or look on him with like derision or like malice like some other people. Like they actually just like, oh yeah, like he's clearly, it mentions that he's visually clear that he's mentally challenged, and they don't like avert their eyes. No, they wave back to him. So it's kind of maybe some foreshadowing of a very big event that we'll be covering this year in the book club series, which of course is a showdown at the Traveler's Rest, which of course is sparked by Shimi. So a lot of setup for Shimi as well, and some unfortunate backstory as to how what Shimi's life looks like on a day-to-day basis at the Traveler's Rest. So that is all I really have. There wasn't a whole lot else that really jumped out at me that I wanted to talk about in the context of spoilers. But yeah, that is where we're going to leave off. Subchapter 6 is where we'll pick up of chapter 5 in next episode, which remember is next time. So a fortnight from now, we're going to be back for the 10th book club episode, because I wanted to flip-flop again, because get your March Insanity nominations in, worst Dark Tower moment, whether that be because it's a sad moment, whether that's a moment that makes you mad, whether that's a moment where you just want to like grab someone and shake them fucking like, like maybe there's a certain bookstore owner that there's probably times that you want to shake and jostle or throw through a plate glass window. There's all kinds of things like, but what are your send them email. Let me go ahead and hit the email stuff real quick. Send an email to show@darktowerpalaver.com. Send me your nominations. Send me as many as you want. Basically, what's going to define it is I'm going to compile everything that everyone sends me. You can send it to me on social media or email. I'm going to compile all that into one master list. I'm going to count it up. The 16 of them that have the most nominations will be the ones that make the bracket. I will announce that 2 episodes from now. That last episode of February will be a roundtable. We'll announce that bracket. We'll show what the bracket looks like, how the matchups work, and then we'll start voting April 1st, and then, or I'm sorry, not April 1st, March 1st, March Madness, March Insanity. So we'll vote all through March, but then April 1st, we will have the reveal and crown the worst Dark Tower moment to counterpunch the best Dark Tower moment, which we've covered before, just like we had the worst, our most hated character, and we've done our most loved character. Those are all of our history of March Insanity polls here at Dark Tower Palaver. So next time, a fortnight from now, we'll be back for a book club to pick up right up where we left off here. If you want to find the show, you can find us, subscribe to us on any podcasting service of your choice: Amazon Music, Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find us. If you want to join us for the live streams, you can do that over here at youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. You can, if you are here on the YouTube side, if you want to subscribe, like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. That will keep you up to date if there's ever any changes that need to happen. You can find the show notes over at darktowerpalaver.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/darktowerpalaver. Find us over on social media if you want to reach out outside of email, which again is show@darktowerpalaver.com. Send an email if you got your March Insanity nominations, but also you can hit us up on social media. Send them over at Facebook.com/darktowerpalaver, on Twitter @darktowerpod, Instagram is darktowerpalaver, as well as I do need to add to my announcements so I can actually remember to actually say it. We are also on Blue Sky. Just search us at Dark Tower Palaver as well. If you want to follow us over there, the new Twitter alternate. So those are all the ways to get in contact with us. And I will, of course, sign off as I always do by saying long days and pleasant nights. All right, everyone in the chat, thank y'all for joining. Let's see. Ben, Mike, David, Agamorphy. We also had someone in here, but I don't know. I can't make sense of that message. I don't know if that's just like, I don't know. Or if I did think of the context of it, it seemed like it was spoilers, so I couldn't really cover it if we're talking about Dark Tower in that sense. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining. It's been awesome. I love doing these. And again, I'm glad to be back on schedule again. So that means that we have 2 weeks until the next episode. I will be here live, same time, as always. And we will be doing part. Oh, you know what? I realize the thing on the screen right now says episode 8. I keep forgetting to change the episode for that because we are on episode 9 right now. I just forgot to change the actual number on this screen. I changed it on the first screen. This one says 9. So this is episode 9. We'll be back for episode 10 in 2 weeks from now, a fortnight from now. So yeah, I'll see y'all later. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being part of the conversation. You guys are awesome. It's one of my favorite aspects of the show in the last number of years is the live streams here, because having you all as part of the conversation is an absolute treat and a joy. And from day one of this podcast, I always knew I wanted the listeners to be a part of the show. That's why we were so heavy on emails early on. But now with the live streams, I love having you all here as part of the live show. Definitely appreciate the hell out of you guys. And yeah, we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.